Hi, everyone. My name's Oliver Emberton. I'm the Managing Director here at Silktide, and as you can probably guess from the screen, today we're talking about making PDFs accessible. So what are we covering today? Right, well, firstly, there's going to be a bit of preamble. So we're going to talk a little bit about how PDFs work, and in particular, how PDFs are experienced by people with a disability. We're going to talk a little bit about what the law requires, but then we're going to move on and spend most of our time looking at actually making PDFs accessible. So we're going to work through some source documents, which is like the document you have before you create the PDF. We're going to look at testing some PDFs, and we're ultimately going to fix a number of PDFs by the end of this session. And so if you've never done this before, this hopefully will be quite eye-opening. Even if you have, maybe you'll learn something new. Again, this is meant to be a very practical session. So I'm assuming most of the people on this call will at some point at least be involved in working with PDFs themselves. And as mentioned earlier, if you've never used it before, slido.com, if you go there, you can open up a separate tab or whatever works for you, do it on your phone. Type in that number 3314. You can submit a question at any time you have them during this session. And then in the last sort of 5-10 minutes or so, I will go through those and we'll see what we have. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible. Right, so before we get started, here's a little bit of a question for you. Of course, I can't hear your replies, so you'll just have to keep this to yourself, but take a wild guess. The average UK council website in July 2020, how many PDFs do you think they have on their public website? And what percentage of those PDFs do you think are inaccessible? Give you 5 seconds. So we did a little bit of research on this. Now, this isn't definitive because we only tested a sample of councils and so on and so on. But basically, it looks like about 3,301 PDFs are inaccessible. Approximately 78%, sorry, 78% of those are inaccessible, 3,301 PDFs. Now, that's actually based on a sample of the main public domain for councils. And we actually, I think, limited each measure to something like 100,000 pages or something. So the actual numbers will be worse than that, but suffice to say, there is quite a lot of work involved in making these accessible, and it's a real challenge for a lot of people. So let's talk a little bit about how PDFs work. This will help frame some of the lessons we'll talk through later on today. For those of you who are not old enough to remember, the PDF was created once upon a time to do something kind of amazing back then. It was the first time we'd made a file format where you could pretty much guarantee it would copy the appearance of something and allow you to transmit it to someone else. That was a new thing back in the, 90s. So what it does really, really well, and in fact, it's really all it does, is it describes appearance. So if you take a document like this ye olde printed document here, it perfectly describes how it looks. What it absolutely doesn't do is anything else, at least not by default. And this is going to be important to understand. They realized sometime after PDFs became popular that this was a problem and that we kind of needed more than just the appearance. We needed extra information if we were going to make PDFs, for example, accessible. And so later on, they added meaning. And they kind of went, okay, we've got this appearance file, and now let's just tack meaning on top of it. Now, in contrast, if you're familiar with, say, HTML, which is used for web pages, don't worry if you don't get the code here, it doesn't matter. But HTML typically represents the meaning first, and then they add the appearance later. Now, this may seem like an academic distinction, but the consequences for you are significant. PDFs are easy to make look consistent, that's what they do, but they are going to be a lot harder to make accessible because by default, the information you need to make them accessible is not actually there. HTML in comparison is usually a lot easier to make accessible, but tends to vary in appearance, as web developers are want to whine about. So you might well ask, PDFs, what are they good for? Well, the answer isn't absolutely nothing. There are a few things. Firstly, they are, as I mentioned earlier, they're portable. They are a file format where you can create them on one computer, send them to another, and they will get the same thing, which we take for granted, but it's actually kind of amazing. They're also permanent. If you had a web page and say from 1998, and you looked at it on a computer now, there's a good chance it won't work at all. But if you take a PDF from 1998, it'll be fine. And you should probably rely on a PDF working 50, 100 years in the future, which is incredibly useful for some things. They're also great for printed media like tax forms or whatever. If you just want to take something that you've got that you would print out, you can send it as a PDF. Unfortunately, these same qualities make them absolutely diabolical for accessibility in particular, as we will see in a moment. And we're going to look at how they kind of fix that. But it's basically fixing through patching and hacks. And those same challenges also make PDFs harder to maintain, because generally what you have to do with PDF, as you'll see in a minute, is you create a PDF from some other piece of software, so say a Word file, and then you have to then fix parts of the PDF afterwards. And then if you want to maintain the original documents, you update the original Word file and then create a new PDF. You have to repeat this process. So this is kind of a tax on using PDFs that is unfortunate. And ultimately, the mobile experience for PDFs, I'm sure, as you all know from personal experience, is pretty terrible. You just can't really read them. There's a lot of work in that area. They're trying to improve it now, but it's still got a long way to go. Don't just take my word for it. Government Digital Service will tell you the same thing. Generally, they annoyed a lot of people with this article, but they themselves advocate that PDFs should be avoided wherever possible. Anyway, let's move on to experiencing PDFs with a disability. So the thing about PDFs is they're actually kind of a nice way of getting familiar with the basics of accessibility, because they kind of illustrate a ton of things that we just take for granted. So imagine you're looking at, say, a PDF like this document I have pictured here on the right. So this document is something that we can just look at, right? Assuming you have normal vision and normal motor control, you can just look at a PDF like this. You can go, oh, I see the titles. I see this paragraph on the left. I see this icon next to the title. You kind of understand what's going on. And you've actually got a wealth of information there that you take for granted, pretty much available to you instantly. You can just glance at an image and you kind of automatically understand it. But that's not actually the case for everyone. It's also not the case that everyone has the ability to just scroll through a PDF in the same way you might take for granted. So you might just be using, the wheel of your mouse and you just don't care about it. But for many people, that, as you'll see, isn't actually an option. So to give one somewhat cliched example, a user with a screen reader, which is technology that will read out what is on your phone or your desktop computer, a screen reader would actually be forced to read out a PDF word by word. So it would be like listening to a podcast version of a PDF, except with some controls or gestures they can use to kind of go to the next sentence, or go to the previous sentence, or skip forward a little bit further, that kind of thing. And similarly, some users might, for example, have a braille display or some other accessible technology. There are many variations of this, but the core concept is you're only going to see a tiny slice of a PDF at any one time. And I probably shouldn't say see, you're going to experience a slice of the PDF. So in this example here, we might be having the words corporate business flyer read out. And again, as a normally sighted user, I can look at that and I know exactly what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the title at the top of the page. It's really obvious. But if it's just being read out to me, I don't know that at all. And as I step through this document, say I was using a screen reader, I might get this sentence read out. And then somewhat confusingly, I might have the following sentence be this one, which is kind of wrong, obviously, right? Now, again, as a sighted user, I can look at that and I can go, well, that's stupid. I don't want to read that. I want to go down here. But as you will see with PDFs, this is unfortunately not an easy thing to necessarily guarantee, because it's a format that encapsulates the appearance of a document and nothing else. By default, it isn't actually obvious what should be read before the next part of the document. There are lots of attempts to make technology to get smarter and smarter at doing this, but they're all kind of imperfect. You're going to see some in a minute. So a common problem with a PDF is someone might have, say, this part of text read out, and then this part, and then this part, and then this part, and so on. And so they're getting essentially half and half of two columns or some other random splat of text, which makes absolutely no sense when it's read out of context. So this would be completely inaccessible in this example. Often you'll find suddenly you'll just, your attention, as it were, or what gets read out will just jump somewhere down else on the page and maybe down over here, and then this. And you wouldn't know because, again, you can't perceive the location information. You can't perceive something as relatively positioned to something else. So all you know is you're just getting random words given to you, and none of it makes any sense. The standard solution for this, which is something we're going to deal with later on today, is to actually specify the order of the parts of your PDF. And in some cases, this is trivial. And in some cases, like a PDF like this would be a little bit trickier. But you just have to kind of nudge the software in the right direction so it knows what to read out in what order. Another problem that you would have if you were using an accessible technology like a screen reader is you don't see a whole PDF. Again, we can just glance at it. But if you were a screen reader, you only hear or experience a small slice of it at any one time. So you don't even know how big the PDF is. You don't know what else is on the PDF. The only way you can experience this document is to literally have every single word on it read out to you one at a time, which is incredibly exhausting. It's bad enough for a single page like this, but if you've got something like an instruction manual or, heaven forbid, a 200-page novel or something, it's essentially impossible. And so the standard solution for this is the same as the solution we've used and you've probably experienced for, say, web pages, which is to use semantic headings. There are other things you can do as well, bookmarks and so on. We're not going to talk about those right now, but semantic headings is kind of the main one, the one that gets you the furthest. And this is where you take a document and you provide clear headings, which are always good anyway. They just make your text easier to understand, but you actually label them in a kind of what we call a semantically correct way, which is to say they actually have a formal structure. So there's something called a heading 1 that's at the top, and then the heading 2s appear inside the heading 1, and the heading 3 appears inside the heading 2s, and so on. So this is like a hierarchy of headings. And creating this does a whole ton of things, but the most important it will do for accessibility is it kind of provides a sort of index, if you will, a table of contents that they can listen to and skip to without having to listen to every part of the document. So they can just ask, can you read out all of the headings on the page, or can you go to the next heading? And this allows you to navigate what would otherwise be a very intimidating and long document much, much more effectively. So these are considered an absolute cornerstone of modern accessibility. Anyway, we're going to look into how we do that in a moment. But before I get onto the practical side, just one final thing, which is, what does the law say? So, of course, we're dealing with UK law here. The short but inaccurate version is that all public sector PDFs must be made accessible by the 23rd of September 2020. I emphasize that is not entirely accurate. I'm going to clear up a few ambiguities here. The links, if you want them, to the official regulations and directives are at the bottom. Again, this will be recorded and you'll be able to get the slides afterwards. So if you haven't typed in that URL quite quickly enough, you'll be able to get that later. Just to explain quickly what we mean by accessible, because accessible PDFs is not actually really formally stated. The directives actually don't say, which is kind of confusing. They refer to WCAG 2.1 AA, which is like the sort of the official international standard for accessibility. But that itself doesn't actually define what makes PDFs accessible. And the nearest they get to is referring to something called PDF/UA, which is another lovely ISO standard. I don't recommend reading any of these unless you really have difficulty sleeping. But in practice, what that will mean for you is generally you're going to end up using Acrobat Pro DC, which we're going to look at in a moment, but is basically the nearest practical tool you're likely to be able to check your PDFs with and actually kind of remediate your PDFs with. There are alternatives, but that's the one that's probably going to cover your basis in the least amount of work. Now, there are a number of exemptions in this law. They are confusing. So we put together this diagram to hopefully make it slightly less confusing. There's a whole load of specific clauses. Again, if you want to read the laws, and you're welcome to, but this hopefully simplifies it a bit. So if you were to start off on the top left, you just look at your PDF. Is it a map or heritage? And heritage means something like out of a library or a museum. Basically, you're not going to be dealing with heritage, I suspect, ever. So you could probably ignore that. But if it's a map, it's specifically exempt. There's an understanding that maps are one of the types of media that cannot really be made accessible reliably to everyone. And so if you have a map, you can, as a PDF, just ignore it, basically. Just make sure you've got the address information and so on somewhere else. Next question would be, is it needed for active administration? So are you using this PDF in a regular basis in an actual like process or service you deliver? So in the event that it is, then you absolutely have to make it accessible. That's the end of the story, basically. Even if it's an old PDF, even if it's, well, anything except a map or heritage, basically, you just have to make it accessible. And then you get into some weird nuance. So then if your PDF is older than September 2018, you can assume it's exempt. If it isn't, is it on an intranet or extranet substantially revised before September 2019, which is a very hard thing to phrase in a small box. So just to elaborate on that, if you have an intranet or an extranet, so basically private content, behind like a login area, and the intranet or extranet itself has not been substantially revised after September 2019, then it is essentially exempt. Now, this creates a rather perverse incentive for people to not want to update their intranet technology or their extranet technology after September 2019, which I'm not sure is what they intended. But the understanding, I think, is that a lot of people have very large and expensive intranets or extranets, and making them accessible is not entirely practical. The only other thing that's not mentioned here is there is a exemption for sort of an unreasonable burden or disproportionate burden, where essentially content would be so hard to make accessible that you could argue it would be completely disproportionate. So for the sake of argument, if you had to spend like 3 times your annual budget making, a PDF accessible or something, then you can make a reasonable case that that should be exempt. It's extremely hard to make that case for most PDFs, but let's pretend you had, I don't know, 50,000 extremely obscure PDFs that were almost never accessed, and maybe you can make a case that those aren't worth dealing with. Your circumstances will be specific to you, I'm afraid. Okay, so that's enough preamble. With the rest of today, we're actually going to be looking at some actual documents and some actual software. So, excuse me, we're going to start off by fixing some source documents. And what I mean by this is the document you create, which then is turned into a PDF. So the golden rule is wherever possible, you want to be using your source document. Let's say it's a Word file or Excel or InDesign. Modifying the original is basically, without exception, is going to be easier. It's going to be faster. It's going to result in a more accessible document, and it's going to be much easier to maintain, because usually you can then just modify the original and create a more or less accessible PDF afterwards. So this is definitely best practice. I appreciate in some cases it isn't possible. We'll look at what to do later when it isn't. But to get started, we are going to take a Word document. So let's just skip into Word. And I believe, yep, this is the one. Good. Right, okay. So what I have here is a example Word document. And I've created this to kind of illustrate a number of standard features that you would find in Word. So we've got like an image over here and another one, some decoration. There's a bulleted list and a couple of tables, and actually that appears, you know what? I think I've accidentally, let me just load that document again, because I have a horrible feeling I actually had the modified version open by mistake. 1 second. I may have already fixed it. That would be bad. Let's just check that's correct. That's better. Right, okay, good. So yeah, so this is a fairly straightforward Word document, but it's going to illustrate a lot of core concepts that we're going to want to look at today. And even if you're not using Word, many of the things you're about to see actually do have an impact on a PDF generally. Plus, in my experience, the vast majority of people who take Word for granted and think they know how to use Word don't, and they're using it incorrectly. So hopefully you'll all learn at least a little something from the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So this Word document, the first thing you want to do if you're making Word files accessible is use the built-in accessibility checker that comes with Word, and many people don't know this exists. So it's under Tools and Check Accessibility. And this menu option is a lifesaver. In fact, it's also probably the best accessibility check you're going to see today, I'm afraid, because it's all going to get much worse and go downhill from here. So enjoy this brief reprieve before we dive into actual PDFs. But what this does is it shows you a sidebar on the right-hand side that highlights specific accessibility issues with this Word file. And you can navigate this quite easily. You can just open up, so you can see there's errors, warnings, and some other stuff. We're going to open up this no header row example, and then there's two tables in here. I'm just going to click on one. And as soon as I do that, it scrolls me down to this table. It actually selects a part of this table. And then it gives me an explanation on the bottom right, which is telling me why I should fix this and how I should fix this. So I'm going to ignore this for a minute. I'm just going to explain it myself. Tables need to be specifically defined in a way that they can be read out to users. So we take it for granted that if we look at a table, we know what it says just by visually scanning, the columns and the rows and whatever in the table and putting the meaning together. But that actually isn't the case if you can't see the layout. So as an example, I know that the average temperature here in 2018 is 17.2 degrees C, and apparently it's 67.2 degrees C in 2020. Maybe that's just my me working from home. The number of days in 2018 is increased from 365 to 15,962 in 2020. There's a bit of a spoiler for you guys there, the rest of the year. But it's easy for you to put this information together because you can just look at it. But if a screen reader was reading this out, it's just got the text. So what you need to do is you need to actually tell Word this row here is a heading. And as it says at the bottom right, the way to do this is to go to Table Design. And then there's this checkbox here, header row, and I can just check this, and that will mark that row there as a header. So you can't actually see anything, I'm afraid, it's invisible. But you will notice that the error that was in the right-hand side of this panel has gone away. So if I undo that again, let me just uncheck that. So you'll see there's the error on the right-hand side, and if I check it, it will disappear. So that's a really simple issue to fix. I mean, it only took a mouse click or two, but you just need to know what these things are and ideally why they matter. There's a slightly more complex table below it. Now this one this has two heading rows. So I don't know if you can see, you've got 2018, 2019, 2020, and then you've got this kind of grouped heading above it before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. So what you can do is you can select these two rows here and actually mark them as a header. But there's still a problem. This Word will be telling you, no, not here, sorry. Word will be telling you that this cell is split into two. And as a general rule, it will recommend you don't do this. Sometimes you have no choice. I understand it certainly can make sense, like this table I'm looking at now. The problem with doing this is generally it's very hard to describe a table like this to someone who is having it read out to them. So you can just about say things like, the number of days in 2020 is 15,000 or whatever, but it's hard for you to say the number of days in 2018 before COVID-19 is, and so on. You have to combine the different parts of the layout. And again, it's very hard for a machine to understand that. So their recommendation is basically don't do this if you can. You could do something like, for example, this is just one way around it. There's 100 different ways you could redesign this table, but you could imagine doing something like that, although that's kind of ugly, but you could do it. You could potentially, to be honest, probably the easiest thing is just to remove this row. If you don't need it, just get rid of it. There's different ways, but generally this is discouraged. However, in this case, I'm going to ignore that discouragement. We're going to keep it, and I'll show you why when we get to Acrobat later. So let's ignore that one, and let's have a look at another issue. So this is text that is too faint to be read. So if you can actually see that, there's a little piece of text here, and it's in light gray. And so Word has highlighted this as a problem, and it's suggesting that we make it something legible. So I could just change the color, and that issue will go away. Now, I'm actually not going to change the color. And the reason I'm not is because I want to show you what Acrobat does with this later on. But normally, yes, you would take advantage. Basically, Word will highlight contrast issues like this, but Acrobat does not. So if possible, again, fixing this in a source document is going to save you work later on. Right, but yes, let's get rid of that. And we get rid of that. Okay, so what have we got? So next up, we've got alternative text. So I'm sure you're all familiar with alternative text from, say, a web page. It's the same principle here with a PDF. If you have an image in a document and someone is having the document read out to them, or they're experiencing it through, say, Braille, then they won't be able to see the images. So you need to provide a text equivalent for those images. So Word is telling me how to do this, again, in the bottom right, but I already know. So I'm just going to click on here and edit alt text. And Word is actually kind of clever. Where possible, it looks at your photos, your images, and it tries to guess alt text for you. So it's done a not terrible job here. A person sitting on a rock. I'm going to change that to a woman sitting on a rock, staring into the distance or whatever. But there we go. Right. So something like that. And then that's one image down. There's 3 more to go. I'll have a look at the next image. Now, this image is interesting because this image is kind of pointless. So if you have a look at this, this is just like a little sort of divider, if you will. It's like a little graphical flourish. And you will often get things like this. What you should ideally do is you should mark these as decorative. So basically, this is where you don't provide alternative text on purpose, because this part of the page, it doesn't make sense. You would literally not want to describe this image to a blind person, because it would only confuse them and it would add no value to their understanding of the page. So I'm going to edit alt text for this, and I'm going to check this box here, mark as decorative, which will get rid of that one. And then we've got one down here. Let's just do this quickly, where funnily enough, Word says this is a screenshot of a cell phone. It's actually a screenshot of Word. So I guess Microsoft Word doesn't recognize Microsoft Word, but whatever, there we go. So I'll do that. And then there's one more left. And this one's a little bit funky. So there's actually 2 images here. Sorry, 2 problems with this image here. There's the alternative text, but there's also this other issue at the top, which is the image or object is not in line. Now, what this means is the layout of this part of the page, this image, has been like moved across to the side of the page, and as a result, Word doesn't really know where it belongs. If you remember from my earlier example, we were talking about how often PDFs don't know which part to read out first and which part to read out second, and so on. In this case, it really is confusing. Word is going, well, is it example Word document, the image, introduction? Is it example Word document, introduction, the image? Is it this document will explore some of the features of image, Microsoft Word, and so on? There's like at least 3 or 4 different ways this could be interpreted. And it doesn't have a clue, basically, because it's not sentient. So what they suggest you do is you can change this so that it's actually in line with your text, which basically just means it's some part of the actual document. So, you know, it essentially goes in between the text. Now, the problem with this is, as you can see, it looks kind of ugly. In this case, I've lost some of the presentation of this document. I personally wouldn't want to do this, but it is an option and it would fix it. To be honest, in this case, this image isn't actually serving any real purpose. It's kind of decorative. You don't need to know that there's a picture of the Word logo in the top right corner. It doesn't actually add any value at all to this document and understanding it. So what I would actually do is I would edit this alt text and I would mark it as decorative. And by doing that, I actually fix 2 problems, because the image is no longer relevant, so we don't care about where it fits in the layout. With a bit more time and experience, you'll kind of get used to sort of detecting these kind of things and working around them. But that gives you a quick example, at least. So what you've seen here so far. Oh, hello. Did I miss? Oh, apparently I didn't apply the. Sorry, let me just fix that. Apparently I didn't apply a header row to this table. There we go. That's better. So what you've seen so far is we've gone through this Word document. We've worked through these issues on the right. I've actually consciously chosen, but just to demonstrate, I've chosen not to fix this text, but that's only because I want to show you it later on. And this issue, I've chosen not to fix because I actually want to show you what it looks like in a PDF. But normally you would actually fix those here. And then you would simply save them. I would recommend strongly by using the Acrobat tab, but we'll come to that. Now, before I go any further, I want to show you one thing that we took for granted in this document that it did perfectly, that isn't obvious and is super, super important. But to do that, I need to show you a document that doesn't do it properly. So this document looks fine, right? This is just a regular, simple Word document. It's got some text and headings. It's fairly straightforward. But this is actually terrible. This is just about one of the worst things you could do for accessibility. For a very simple reason, it doesn't define any headings. Now, it looks like it does. You can clearly read this text. It looks like a heading. But if you go back to our last Word document, if I click on this text here, so let's say I click on this example Word document. If you look at the top, it says heading 1. And if I click on this one here, it says heading 2. If I click this text below it, that's normal, and so on. And actually, all of these, the headings in this document are actually defined. So they're actually like Word can recognize them in the top. But if I go back to my bad document and do the same thing, you'll notice that doesn't happen. It thinks this is normal text. This is normal text. This is normal text. It doesn't understand any of it is any different. Another way of appreciating this is if you get rid of this panel, if you go to View, Sidebar, and Navigation, and if you haven't used this, this is a brilliant feature. You should totally use this. This will show you a sidebar with all of the headings in your document laid out. So this is the heading 1 example Word document. Below it, the heading 2, heading 2, heading 3, and it's actually provided like a sort of a navigation bar that just lets me skip around my document really, really easily. Now, this is incredibly useful just purely as a normal content author. If you're ever writing a long Word document, this is a real time saver. But the reason it's able to do this is because it actually knows these are headings, so it can produce that structure. And this is the exact same navigation that will be produced for accessible technology later on. So doing so makes a big difference. But if we looked at this Word document, I did the same thing, View, Sidebar, Navigation, then there is no navigation. There are no headings. It doesn't know what to do. So to fix that is super, super easy. I'm literally just going to select the line I want. So this one, I'm going to say that is a heading 1. So I just click on heading 1. And you can see immediately that appears in the sidebar. And I'm going to select this one, heading 2, and I'm just going to quickly apply these, heading 2 and heading 2. So that gave me side navigation. There's only one real problem, which is it kind of looks terrible. And we're going to fix that very quickly. So I'm just going to delete a couple line breaks. A common thing with headings is they tend to have spacing around them, which is actually very much deliberate. It makes your life easier, actually. But if you're not used to it, you might have to remove some. And then the thing I might not like here is I might say, well, I don't like my headings being all blue. This is terrible. And I think this is one of the main reasons people don't like using headings, or maybe they're just not familiar how to work with them. But if you right click on one of these and go to modify, you can control what this looks like. So I'm just going to go and make that black and save that. And I'll do the same with heading 2, which is going to take a couple clicks. Do that. In fact, actually, I'll make it like a medium gray because I'm feeling artistic. There we go. So you can see I've basically just applied a series of styles. That took only a few clicks. One of the real advantages of doing this is, apart from this is definitely more accessible, you get the navigation. You actually get access to a whole ton of brilliant new features as a result that many people don't even realize are possible. So you can like go into, I don't know, change if you wanted, you could decide you wanted all of your headings indented a centimeter into the left, and you can just do it, right? So this is actually a classic way of making like document templates actually surprisingly attractive and accessible at the same time. There you go. I just created an artistic way of presenting my headings. And it's only a few mouse clicks once you figure it out. Another thing you can do is you can do stuff like stick in a table of contents, which is fantastic feature if you've never used it. So if you've ever had to maintain a table of contents for a document, this will just take care of it and do all the linking and update it all for you. So there's lots of reasons to use headings in a Word document besides the accessibility, but definitely from an accessibility perspective, they are essential. So that was our original Word document. Now I'm just going to go into Keynote for a second. So how do we export these? So there's some misunderstanding among how Word documents should best be exported. Anything from Office, you want to use the Acrobat tab. You will need Acrobat installed. You want to click on this tab, and then you want to click on something like Create PDF. It might vary depending on if you're Windows or Mac, but you just want to click this button. Or if you're using Acrobat, you can go into Acrobat and import the Word document into Acrobat. What you want to try and avoid doing is going to File, Save as PDF. Doing that will actually strip out a lot of the accessible information, so that's a problem. And you never ever want to go print to PDF. That will ruin the accessibility of your PDF. It's an absolute catastrophe. It just removes everything that we've just done, all the heading information, all of that just goes. So don't ever do that. Right, so let's move on to testing and fixing PDFs. Now, unfortunately, the standard software for doing this is your worst nightmare. I wish I could recommend something else. Acrobat Pro DC, which is the latest version of Acrobat Pro, it costs about £15 a month, depending on your billing options, whatever. It is slow, it is prone to crashing, it has a terrible user experience, and there is nothing better. So let's use that to test and fix a couple of PDFs. So if I go into here. Now, before I get started, the first thing you're going to want to do in Acrobat is, if you haven't already got it, you're going to want to add the accessibility panel to your side. So you just go to Tools and search for accessibility and add this. And then I'm going to drag it to the top because I use it a lot. So that's really handy. And then let's just open a PDF. So I'm going to take this one, I think. There we go. Yeah, so this is the one we worked on earlier. Now, I've already done, of course, a lot of work on this Word document, so this is actually going to be quite easy, but I want to show you the process before I show you something a little bit trickier. So it's quite straightforward. You click on Accessibility on the right-hand side, and then Accessibility Check. You're going to ignore all these options, and you're just going to go Start Checking. And then you're going to get a report on the left-hand side. And what this does is it breaks down any accessibility issues, and as you can see, there are 4 under Documents. If I just open that out. Most of these are ticked, right? So nearly everything's a tick. That's great. And the tick's fine. You don't need to do anything for a tick. But there's a couple of issues that are red. These are definite failures you need to fix. And there's a couple that are blue, which are possible areas you need to check manually. So we're just going to fix the 2 red ones really quickly. The first thing is this title. So amazingly enough, even when you export PDF properly from Word, it somehow strips out the title, for reasons that nobody understands. It's just terrible for some stupid reason. But anyway, you can easily fix it. You right click on title, select fix, and then Acrobat, being the pile of garbage that it is, decides to keep the old title from the last PDF I worked on, because of course it does. So let's just delete that. And there's this checkbox, leave as is. Sometimes this is ticked. You need to make sure it's unticked, or you won't be able to edit the title. And then you just want to type in whatever you want your title to be. So let's do that. I should do that. There we go. And that just ticks the issue is fixed. Next up is primary language. Again, just right click on it, select fix. And I'm going to select English. Okay, so that's done. So as you can see, these issues are really, really easy to fix. They're minor and annoying, but they do need fixing. Color contrast. Now, if I right click on this, there's no way to just fix it. Because Acrobat isn't that clever. It can't really do color contrast. It can explain it to you if you want to read the help, but you actually have to check it manually. So what you'd normally do is eyeball it. Now, when I looked at this in Word earlier, we already know there was this text here, this faint text that was not legible. I actually left that in on purpose just to show you what it looks like here. The point is that Acrobat does not recognize this problem. Okay, so I'm going to recognize it manually, and I'm going to go, yeah, okay, that's bad. We don't want that faint text. So I would select Edit PDF, and I would just select this piece of text here, and I'm going to choose color. And Acrobat's user interface continues to astonish me with how terrible it is, but there we go. And that's it. So that's fixed. So I'm going to now mark the color contrast as passing, because that was straightforward. So we've done nearly everything in the PDF except one minor issue, which is fixing the logical reading order. And how hard might that be, you might wonder? Well, to look at it, we're going to need to add another fixed panel to our side here. So these standard 4 icons that you get, you're going to need a new one. And we're going to right click here, and we are going to select order. And once you've done that once, it'll stay there forever. So maybe you've already got this panel. What this does is it shows you the parts of each page, and it attaches a number to each part to show you what order they're read out in. So if you look here on the right, you can see the number 1 is next to this kind of heading, right? And I can actually select that on my little menu, and then I can use my cursor keys, excuse me, to pan through these. So I can just go down cursor, down cursor, down cursor, and I can kind of step through these. And so you can see these first 6 are in order. This makes sense, right? I get this heading, this heading, this text, this heading, this heading, this text. And then it says, makes it easy to add images to a document like so, colon, leading up to the image. And then we skip the next one to 7, which, if you're paying attention, it's this tiny little empty space here next to the image for no particularly good reason. And then number 8 is this text. Number 9 is this empty space. Number 10 is this empty space. Number 11 is the image we had earlier. Number 12 is this divider. And number 13 is this Word document image here at the top. So yeah, this is actually relatively not bad, but it hopefully illustrates the point, which is that even though you might think it's obvious what order things should be read out in, unfortunately, Acrobat doesn't always agree, and you are going to be responsible for fixing this. So there's a little panel down here. This is probably the actually, no, I'm not going to use that right now. I'll do that in a minute. The first thing I want to do is I just want to reorder this image. So this number 11, I really want it under number 6. So the easiest way to do that is to select 11 here in the sidebar, and then I'm going to drag that under the number 6 here and let go. And so now if you look at this, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 is the space, 9, and so on. So that fixes the biggest, most egregious problem. The other problems, however, well, firstly, you might be wondering, why on earth do we even have this Word image here? This is like, didn't we just give that blank alternative text? And we did. And unfortunately, Acrobat doesn't care because it ignores that when you export a Word file, at least at the moment it does. So what we're going to have to do is click on this little button here, and this panel is going to be your friend. You're going to use it a lot. The reading order panel, if you click this, allows you to select any part of a PDF and to kind of override what it is. So all we're going to do for now is we're going to select, this decorative image here, and we're going to click this button that says background/artifact. And doing that essentially says this is content you just want to ignore. Like, don't care about it. Just don't show it to anyone, accessibility wise at least. And we're just going to do that with these spaces as well. I'm just going to get rid of them so we don't have to read out that there's a space on the page, which is really annoying. And likewise, this logo in the top right corner, do that. And then what we now have is hopefully a sensible layout with a little less on it. So you've got all these components, step through them, that all makes sense. And then the next page is a lot simpler. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with the next page. This just works, so that's good. And then, yeah, that's basically it. So that's relatively straightforward. One thing I did actually miss out was that table. I don't know if you remember earlier on, I deliberately chose not to split the table. Now, just to give you an idea of why that is a pain, we're not going to have much time to do this in detail, but I'm going to quickly show you something a little bit more advanced. Don't worry if you don't get this. The point is less that you get this and more that you realize how awful this is and why you should try and avoid needing it. The second table, if I was to select this, and you have to do this in like a code view, we call the tag view. If I was to right click on this and go table editor, I can actually see the parts of this table. And what I would actually have to do is I would actually select these cells here, and then I would actually have to mark these as headers for a column. And then I would have to take this part, and then I would have to, oops, hello. Surprisingly tricky to do. There we go. I'd have to say that this spans over 2 columns. And if I did all of this stuff, and it'll warn me that that's probably a bad idea, but I'm going to do it anyway. And if you do all this sort of thing, then you end up with an accessible table. But the point is, you don't want to have to do this, right? Like this other table, because I did everything nice and simple, doesn't require any of these horrible hackery. And you want to try and avoid the hackery because it's not fun. It's easy to get wrong. It just adds extra time. So we're going to move on past that document. That, if I went back to my my original list, I would now mark the reading order as a pass, and that document would be considered accessible. So that would be one document down. Now, to show you a quick example of something else you will come across a lot, that's a scanned document. So this is where I haven't got the original document. In this case, I've only got a piece of paper and I've scanned it in. And this is about as inaccessible as a PDF gets. It's a little bit shorter, thank goodness. There's only one page here. But this entire document is just an image. There is no readable text on it, nothing that could help accessible technology. It is just 100% a fail in every possible accessibility way. And the solution for this is actually kind of the same, or at least to start with. We're just going to click on accessibility in the top right. We're going to click on accessibility check again, and we're just going to go start checking. And then we're just going to take a look at these issues. And there's a lot more issues, but many of these are really easy to fix. The first one is image only PDF. It knows this PDF is just a big image, so there's nothing in it. So we're going to fix that. And to do so, it's going to ask us what the language is, so that's English, and what's the output. And I would strongly recommend always selecting editable text and images. Okay, that. And then give it a minute, and it's turned that document into something you can actually select something. So this is actually text now. This is like machine readable. So that's actually fixed a big problem in itself. And a number of these other problems, we've already fixed title in the past. Let's just go quickly fix that. We'll just go ELD printed document. And primary language fix, and annoyingly it asked me for English, even though I've already told it's English. And then tag PDF, this one's easy. You just go fix, and it will fix it. And so it's tried to do a lot of stuff for you. So actually, mostly that's taken care of. But we do need to look at color contrast, which in this case is simple. There's nothing really to worry about. That's fine. We're just going to pass it. And logical reading order, again, on Nemesis, is this section again. And here you'll see this isn't, well, the order seems okay, but the structure isn't going to be there because we didn't create this from a source document. We didn't create this from, say, a Word file. It has absolutely no idea that any of these are headings or whatever. It just doesn't understand what they are. And I can show you that by clicking on this icon here. And under this menu, at the moment, I'm viewing the page content order. So that's the numbers 1, 2, 3. I'm going to select structure types. So that now shows me what type each one of these parts of the page is. So paragraph, figure, paragraph, figure. And you can see, as far as this is concerned, what we have here is a paragraph of text, a paragraph of text. It doesn't understand there are any headings on this page, and that's an immediate fail as far as we're concerned. So what we need to do to fix that is, again, bring up our friend, the reading order panel. And here I'm going to select this first paragraph, and I'm going to mark this as a heading 1. Just by clicking on this heading 1 button. That's easy. This figure here, again, is decorative. So I'm going to mark that as a background artifact. Get rid of that. And then this is a little tricky because what we have here is we have a paragraph of text, but it's actually got a heading at the start of it. And then the rest of it's normal text, right? So I want to kind of just take this little bit at the start. And to do that, if I move my mouse around here, click, and then drag a box around the text I want, let go. And then that will select that text. And I can now say that is going to be a heading 2, just by clicking this. And I'm going to do the same down here, mark that as a heading 2, and then close that. And the result is now we actually have a document that I can show the order again. So I can go back here. So the order is 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. That's perfectly fine. The structure, as you just saw a moment ago, it's a heading, a figure, text, a heading, text, and a table. So that all works. So that is actually pretty good. So we can mark that as passing. And again, we now have an accessible scanned PDF. So that's enough of those for now. Let's come out. So we're going to run out of time soon. So very quickly, a little word about accessible PDF forms. There is no way I could do this justice in a 50-minute talk. So the short version is they are awful and you want to avoid them. If you have any way to avoid them, please avoid them. If you have to do accessible PDF forms, there's an excellent video I've linked to at the bottom there. You can Google for that text, or you can follow that link. Either way, that is probably the best video I've seen that does it in about an hour. But it's about an hour of them explaining it, of which 20 minutes is them cursing at Adobe. Essentially, the only way to make accessible forms is to kind of go through these torturous series of steps and like undo things and then redo things and then manually fix things, and it's just awful. And again, seriously, if you have any way of doing it, just don't use PDFs or forms, please. And then lastly, just a very quick word about some of the things that Silktide can do to help. Of course, as Socketin members, you have access to a free Silktide report. Some of what I'm about to show you, you already have. Some of this you're going to have, as there's features coming out in the coming months, and some of this is exclusive to our paid customers. But firstly, you all have some kind of assessment of your PDFs. Now, the free report tests the PDFs on your first 125 pages. Obviously, the paid accounts, they test your whole website. But the idea here is you can actually get an overall assessment of how your PDFs are doing. So you can actually see how you're complying against the standards as a whole without having to manually and individually find and look at every PDF in turn. This is new. We've actually expanded our workflow for triaging your PDFs. So we now break them down into these 4 states. So you can have your failing PDFs where we know something's wrong. The ones that need manual review, like you saw earlier today, where you've got to look at, say, the reading order. Passing ones are great. And then ignored are things where maybe a PDF is exempt, or maybe a PDF, for whatever reason, is, I don't know, it's something you're not able to or choose not to work on. The idea is you actually have a workflow here where you can mark your PDFs in these states. So you can work through them and actually keep an overall track of how you're progressing over time. We're adding as well very soon the ability to test a PDF in your browser. So what this means is you'll actually be able to paste in a URL or even upload a PDF and see it in a browser without needing Acrobat. Now, this won't be a replacement for Acrobat. Sadly, we're not able to do everything Acrobat does for remediating PDFs, but we are able to at least test them. So if you wanted an alternative there, that's something that's coming out very soon. And we actually think our UI is a little bit nicer than theirs, but of course we're biased. And then lastly, we're adding this new feature which provides instructions on how to remediate individual PDFs. And we don't think anyone's done this before. It's quite interesting. We ask you a series of questions based on the content and issues with a given PDF. So for example, here you can actually see it's asking, would you like to edit this this PDF in Word, because we know this PDF was created with Word originally. And then if you were to select this, we would actually give you guidance on, what to do in Word, what specific buttons to press, how to export it, etc., etc. And likewise, things like all of the fun and games for evaluating whether or not a PDF is exempt, we've actually reduced those to a series of standard questions that you can just ask. And all of that information gets stored and fed back into your workflow so you can see how you're progressing across your organization. Anyway, that's enough from me today. We've got, in theory, 5 minutes left. I'm sure we can run a little bit over if anyone has any questions. So just going to go into Slido now. Hopefully, there we go. We've got a few. Let's have a look. Right. So what do we have? What happens when public uploads PDF inaccessible documents for public consultation, e.g. planning text documents? Who's responsible? Okay, so if I understand that, you're saying if the general public uploads PDF inaccessible documents. That's actually an interesting one, not heard that before. You are generally responsible for the content on your site. You're not responsible for something you didn't, I would be wary of giving you a definitive answer to that question. I've got the fun and games legal here somewhere if you want to read it, but I think I'd have to think. Let me come back to you on that one. That's a bit tricky. Can you create an accessible document without Acrobat Pro? Right. Sort of. You can. I have yet to find. It really pains me because I hate Acrobat with the passion that could ignite 1,000 suns. But at the same time, I have yet to find anything that could replace it, and I wish I could. In fact, we've even had my own company work on trying to replace it, and I wish I could. In theory, some tools can produce accessible PDFs. But I mean, as an example, Word, which you just saw, right, gets very, very close, but it doesn't it doesn't quite get there. It doesn't include a title, for example, which is ridiculous. I think there might be a way to hack that, but without Acrobat, it's pretty difficult. Is unfortunately my sad answer. Yeah, bigger organizations, very few people in the organization have Acrobat Pro. Well, again, depending on your workflow, so you can use a tool like Silktide to scan the PDFs in your website as a whole to find out which ones need to be developed, but then you may need to partition specific members of your staff to remediate them, and those people have Acrobat, or you may, I'm trying to think of your alternatives really here. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's probably the only way it's going to work. It's either that or you're looking at like an external agency or someone else to help you. It really is unfortunate, but Acrobat just tends to be the de facto solution here. You recommend Acrobat? I have Nuance. So yeah, Nuance it does come up. I have used it briefly. I tend to be a Mac user. Actually, I have to split between multiple platforms, so Mac, Linux, and Windows. So I have little choice but Acrobat in that sense. There are some other solutions like Common Time and so on, which do like an overview of the accessibility and can provide sort of more enterprise workflow and so on. That gets a little bit outside of the day-to-day remediation that you're seeing here. So if Nuance works for you, you could carry on using it. But I can't personally vouch for whether or not it would actually pass the requirements. I would have to check that myself, I'm afraid. Could you not just delete the selected item structure? Yes, actually, you're absolutely correct. You can. And the only reason I didn't do that is I wanted to show you the reading order panel. It's just convenient to show two things in one go. But you're correct. You could delete the selected item structure from the side panel. That would have been equivalent. Sometimes when you manually tag a PDF, it removes some text, images, styling from the PDF. You can't retrieve it back. Why is that? Oh dear. Yes, no kidding. In particular, when you auto tag or if you do some changes to forms, one of the reasons they're difficult is Adobe can kind of mess with the tagging structure. And unfortunately, the only solution I found, and it is just terrible, I'm afraid, is I regularly save my PDFs. Like literally every 5 minutes or less, I save my PDF. And then if something goes horribly wrong, I undo. And if necessary, I use the save version. And I know that's terrible, but that's exactly where we seem to be in the state of PDFs right now. Is PDF specifically for printing? Do we need to make it accessible? Yeah, so, well, if you have an alternative equivalent of the PDF, then you're fine. So if you can say you have a PDF, for example, of, I don't know, let's say meeting agenda, but you've copied that content into a accessible form somewhere else, like a web page, that's fine. You don't need to worry about the PDF. We actually provide a workflow for that where you can mark the PDF as this is PDF, but we have this accessible alternative here instead. Personally, I don't particularly like that approach because I think the trouble is someone could land on the PDF anyway, and it's a bit confusing for users. But at least in theory, yes, that would be compliant. Regarding Word documents and errors, they throw out errors, warnings, and tips. Can tips be right? Yes. So it's hard to say. I don't actually think I have tips in mind. I must have a different version of Word from you. But the errors and warnings. So the distinction in Word is that an error is definitely wrong and a warning is probably wrong. So what it's saying is if you have an error, we know that this thing you're doing is going to cause a problem. And if you have a warning, we're saying, well, we think this thing you're doing is having a problem, but it might be okay. And you kind of need to make a judgment call. And then tips is more like this nudges you in the right direction. I can't say if tips can be ignored without like a definitive list of every tip, but it's, to be honest, if you noticed earlier on, what we did with the Word document is we made the accessible Word document, exported it into a PDF, and then you found that some of the things we did in Word didn't actually carry across. Like I think the ignored alt text for some of the images, which just goes to show you, unfortunately, even the best intentions, some of that stuff can get lost. So over time, as you do this more and more, you'll realize, oh, I'll ignore that issue because by the time I get into Acrobat, it's not even going to matter, or it's going to be ignored what I do. Sorry, that's probably about as definitive as an answer as I can give you here. What should we do to mark up page numbering? You should generally mark that as a background or artifact. You should ignore the page number. If you are using accessible technology, it will read out the page number to them anyway. So it will actually say, you know, PDF page 1 of 4 or something like that, and then they can go into the PDF and they can, experience each page in turn. So there's no value in adding a page number manually. It's just confusing clutter. Multiple ways criteria. What do we do for PDFs? Presumably the PDF text search, either bookmarks or clickable text. Okay, I'm not quite sure I follow the question, to be honest. What do we do? Presumably the PDF text search and either bookmarks or a clickable TOC. Oh, right. Oh, I see. I think what you're referring to is the multiple ways to access specific pieces of content within a PDF. So text search is generally, I mean, it's something that should be there in a PDF, but it's not something you control. So I wouldn't worry about that. And you can't really rely on it because a lot of clients won't necessarily have a text search in a PDF. Bookmarks will be taken care of. We didn't actually cover bookmarks today, but if you did a PDF through, for example, a Word document, then bookmarks will have been created for you. So like, I think that example I had a second ago, have I got a fixed one? This is your bookmarks tab. There you go. So this will look exactly the same as what you saw in Word. And so your headings actually get turned into bookmarks. And that's another reason to do headings, basically. So I would just say do headings properly, and then that's mostly taken care of. There are some exceptions. If, for example, you were using InDesign or something, I think it's different, but generally that's the approach I would take. What's the difference between a title and a subject of a PDF? So you don't actually need a subject. The title is the requirement. Subject is, well, from my experience, maybe I'm missing something, is optional, and one of the kind of like slightly fuzzy pieces of PDF metadata that get kind of tagged on the top, but I don't believe it's actually standard. It's certainly, I don't believe it's in, I'm going to check this now and find out. Oops, because I happen to have it open. No, there you go. It's not inside Matterhorn, for example. So Matterhorn's like the UA PDF standard. So this is like, if you want to bore yourself to death, this is the standard for how to validate a PDF. And it's not in there, so I'm going to assume it's not required. But title, you just want to mirror the title of the document. I don't appear to have a decorative option in my version of Word. Right. Well, again, unfortunately, what you saw a moment ago is when you actually import your decorative images into Acrobat completely ignores them. So thank you, Acrobat. We're hoping that a future version will not ignore that option, but at the moment it kind of doesn't matter. If you're saving a Word document by itself, if you're trying to do a purely accessible Word document, yeah, you want that decorative option. I'm guessing, trying to think what version of Word you must have to not have that option. I don't know. Maybe I can't remember my old versions of Word. I mean, I'm using 365, so it's like up to date all the time. But yeah, I don't really think I can make any other suggestion, to be honest. If you're importing the PDF, just fix it in a PDF by making a background artifact. Let's see what else. Shouldn't we as an organization be in the habit of creating accessible docs, generally, not just web publishing? Absolutely, 100%, completely agree. Thank you. Yes, we absolutely should be creating accessible documents. For what it's worth, if you want to go there, you can create accessible emails as well, although that's a whole other lecture for another time. You may not realize, but when you actually send someone an email, your email may or may not be accessible. But yeah, in practical terms, a lot of organizations really struggle with this stuff, right? They haven't got the technology, they haven't got the training, they haven't got the maybe the foresight, or the awareness is often a real problem. So I personally think documents should be authored in an accessible way first. As it happens at Silktide, we author everything with the principles you saw earlier today by default, just because we tend to be a web company, so we kind of get things like the semantics and so on. It's automatic to us as people, but that's kind of a cultural thing. I think raising awareness of stuff like headings and showing the advantages of that technology can actually help move people that way. But yeah, I agree with you completely. For the printed PDF question I just asked, I meant for PDFs like paper petition form, is only useful printed. Oh, I see. I'm not aware of a specific exemption. I think the problem, right, okay, like a paper, oh, I see. So if I understand what you're saying is you've got a form which would be designed to be printed to be handed out to people. So the idea is there's literally no way anyone could use that document except to print it themselves. That does feel like the kind of thing where you could make an exemption for. It's technic. It's weird actually. The law is what's the term? The law is an arse. The law is not fun when it comes to this. The trouble is they actually do stipulate specific exemptions, and basically, if I can even find this because it's torturous. Oh dear. You know what? I give up. It's just no. You don't want to sit here and read this. The the specific wording is not perhaps friendly to what you're describing. I think you could probably make a reasonable argument. It's the sort of thing you might want to put in your accessibility statement to cover you, to say that, or just add a footnote on the text. But honestly, if a petition form, I don't even know how long it would be. I can't imagine it's more than a page or two of A4. I would have thought it's the sort of thing you could fix in 10 minutes. I may be wrong. May almost be easier to fix it than it is to try and work around. If we don't have option markers decorative, we have Word 2016. How do you get ignore image? Honestly, I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head. I guess you could look at. Oh, there you go. Let's find out. But oh no, that's lovely. The explanation is apparently to do exactly what you can't do. I don't know. Maybe there is a way, but I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head. I haven't. I don't have access to that version of Word anymore. Right. Is it ideal to have this file may not be suitable for users of existing technology requesting accessible format? Yes, that is probably your best practice. Having some message along those lines. I wouldn't necessarily say that you can solve this problem by finding every PDF on your site and adding that text next to it. That would almost be worse. Officially, you can actually, as long as your accessibility statement states something along those lines of there are certain PDFs that for whatever reason may not be accessible. So for example, your archive PDFs, ones that are pre-2018, those PDFs generally are not being made accessible. However, members of the public do have the right to request an accessible format on request. And so you could, say you will honor those. That's not a bad approach to take. If you're migrating something that's important and you think it's going to be a big problem that you haven't made it accessible yet, adding a note near it would probably be prudent. But but other than that, really, you just need to be working through the documents. I mean, especially anything that's actually actively used for administration functions, that's the stuff you need to focus on. If converting to PDF strips out some accessibility fixes, is it worth uploading Word documents instead? So, okay, so the main reason why it's better is you're going to get headings are a huge save. I mean, you saw how much of a pain it was to do headings in Acrobat, right? But doing them in Word is easier, and you get all the advantages in Word. The other thing I didn't really show you because there's not much time, but if you looked at something like a bullet list in Word converts nicely into a PDF. Creating a bulleted list in a PDF, ironically, is not accessible. Don't get me started. So it's extremely hard to create things like accessible bulleted lists from scratch in a PDF. It's much, much easier just to do it in a Word document. And also it's kind of better practice. And the Word documents are accessible for other co-workers. So if you have co-workers with accessibility needs and you've made a Word document in that way, then it's more accessible for them as well. So it's a win all round, really. Okay, we're nearing the end, I think. Oh, God, it's 10 minutes past, yeah. I'll just wrap up quickly. Is it possible to quickly reiterate the earlier point by the flowchart? Right, yes. So documents that are on a intranet or extranet that is before September 2019 are exempt, but that's based on like the age of the intranet, extranet, unless it is, quote, I think substantially revised. I think that's the terming. Which is a bit vague. What does substantially revised mean? I think the idea is if you've got old accessibility incompatible extranet, intranet, they know it's going to be very hard for you to fix that. So they give you an exemption. But if you get a new intranet or extranet or you upgrade it, then that's expected to be accessible. I think that's the theory. Any innovative ways of how authorities are rolling out training stuff? Goodness. We're gonna not really enough time for that one. Word versus PDF. Is there anything wrong with uploading Word documents to a website? So PDFs are definitely easier to read for a wider number of people. The Word documents are less accessible, portable generally. But so I would generally prefer a PDF to a Word document if I had to do it. But yeah, you can upload Word. You'll find that, so basically anyone can open a PDF, right? Anyone with a web browser or a mobile phone can open a PDF, but Word can require specialist software. So they may need a viewer or something. And so more people are going to be able to access a PDF, I would say. And I think that's probably, oh, there you go. Apparently decorative tag answer. I read you just type decorative into the alt description. There you go. Thank you, Anonymous. That's a very helpful answer. I did not know that. So I think that's all we've got time for today.